Hello, good evening, and welcome to step 6 in our walking tour of the Bible through the book of Genesis. One of the really great things about a walking tour of the Bible is that you can slow down when you want to slow down, and you can speed up when you want to speed up. You don't have to spend the same amount of time on every single verse of the Bible. So, nothing to see here. We quickly move on through the genealogies in the book of Genesis because they're not particularly interesting. But every now and then we're drawn up short. And one such thing that draws us up short are the first 9 verses of the 11th chapter of the book of Genesis. Very odd story, this, a very famous story, the story of the Tower of Babel. Well, as a matter of fact, it's not just a tower, it's a tower and a city. The men are in the valley of Shinar, which is taken to be Babylonia, and there they're building a tower, which is usually assumed to be the ziggurat, which was a huge sort of pyramid structure that the people of Israel would have been familiar with, and which had been built maybe thousands of years before this story actually got written down. So the story is showing you how this huge ziggurat came to be, this sort of rather unfinished looking structure. And they're also building not just the ziggurat, they're building a city. And so that they won't be scattered, they're coming together. Now, people coming together to build a city sounds like a very good idea, doesn't it? In fact, it's a very Christian idea. We often talk of the city of God. Of course, if you just talk about the city of this world, that's not such a good thing. But generally speaking, it does say in the psalm, after all, men flourish in the cities. And it also is clear to us that civilization, the word we use, civilization, is connected to civitas, which means the city. And of course, we inherit the tradition of the ancient Greeks. And the ancient Greeks saw the city as the ultimate civilized place, the place where you were able to meet up with your fellow human beings and discuss what really mattered. In other words, philosophy. And therefore, the city is the place where people experience life to the full. That's Aristotle thought that, and I think that too, actually. I think living in cities is wonderful. Of course, we've got this romantic idea that the countryside is very ennobling and things like that. But the truth of the matter is, it's a massive movement throughout history of people towards cities. Right now in Africa, about half the African population lives in cities. This is a huge development, and more will come to cities, and cities are growing all over the world. We live in an era of mega cities. But of course, God does not approve of this city. He comes down and he confuses their languages. It's not clear how he does this, and the people break up in confusion. The Lord says, so they are all a single people with one single language. This is only the start of their undertakings. Now, nothing they plan to do will be beyond them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language there, so they cannot understand one another. And so he scattered them all over the world, and they stopped building the city. In other words, what God intended actually came to pass. The city became a ruin, in other words, or an unfinished project. That is why it was called Babel, since there the Lord confused the language of the whole world, and from there the Lord scattered them over the whole world. So what was the sin of these people who were building the city? They said to one another, come, let us make bricks, etc., and with fire. They said, let's make a name for ourselves, they said, so that we do not get scattered all over the world. It seems not so great a sin. Let's make a name for ourselves so we don't get scattered over the world. To bring people into unity is actually quite a good thing, surely. So it's a bit mysterious. I suppose if you want to interpret this, but you'd be in danger of over-interpreting it, in my humble opinion, is you'd say this is the sin of pride. And also it's the sin of doing things without God's inspiration. Let's do this, but let's do it on our own without God to help us. In other words, let's build the perfect worldly paradise. Oh, let's all be Marxists and found the perfect society. We know how that ended. It's effectively, that's how you could interpret it, but I think it's a bit of an over-interpretation. I think what this is really saying is that God doesn't like cities. And therefore, it's part of that thread, which I've already spoken about throughout the book of Genesis and indeed throughout the whole Bible, where the people who are scattered over the land, the nomadic people, the pastoralists, the shepherds of the flock, are the good guys, and the people who live in cities are the really bad guys. And of course, let's remember, as we'll get on with the book of Genesis, we'll find that the very worst people who've ever lived in the cities of the plain. That's Sodom and Gomorrah, if you remember those two. So cities are bad. Don't forget, when the Israelites invade the land, they overthrow the cities, Jericho, Jerusalem. They are the shepherds and the wanderers who come in and take over the cities. Um, so therefore, the city dwellers and the Israelites are on different sides. And therefore, this is just yet another bit of anti-city propaganda. It's also a just so story yet again. Why do we all speak different languages? Well, because God confused their languages because he didn't like the city dwellers, etc., or the first city dwellers. It's also historical. Yes, well, first of all, there's this shadowy reference to the ziggurat. Don't get too excited about that. What's historical is this. They were living in Mesopotamia, and that's where the land of Shinar is. And they said, come, let us make bricks and bake them in the fire. In other words, this is the beginning of industry. Industry almost certainly began in various river valleys, the Indus Valley, the Ganges Valley, and indeed Mesopotamia, because there was plenty of soil, there was alluvial plains, and therefore people worked out how to make bricks and how to construct, well, cities. And then it says for stone, they use bricks. Whereas, other people were using stone, but these were using bricks, which could be mass produced and which make building much cheaper and easier. So I think that's historical. You see, suddenly, we're in the land of myth so far, 11 chapters into Genesis, but this is historical. People made bricks in Mesopotamia. True. And then for mortar, they used bitumen. What's bitumen? Well, bitumen, I'm not a scientist, but bitumen is actually what sometimes we call pitch. In other words, it's crude oil that bubbles to the surface. That in Mesopotamia, northern Mesopotamia, were pitch lakes, just as there are pitch lakes in various parts of the world. So they didn't actually drill for oil. They found oil on the surface and they used this oil to bind the bricks together instead of cement. Whether that works or not, I've no idea. As they used to say on the telly in the old days, don't try this at home. Okay, good evening. Have a great evening. And that's the Tower of Babel for you. All the best. Bye.